Hi, this is Lori with Time to Be Creative, and today I want to talk to you a little bit about knitting in the round and using circular needles. So to start, I just wanted to show you some different needles. Of course, these are straight needles, which you're probably familiar with. These are a size 15. These are a size 5. And these, of course, are bamboo, and these are, I think, aluminum. And knitted many years on straight needles, but in the last several years I've discovered circular needles and really use those almost exclusively. But as I've said in my article, I think not all circular needles are created equal. This is a brand called Takumi. These are circular needles, and as you'll see in the packaging, they'll tell you the length of the cable or the cord in between the knitting needles and then the size of the knitting needle. And I would encourage you to keep your packaging and then restore your needles. Otherwise you end up with something like this, which I don't know if you can see, is a mess I have of knitting needles, which is not really a good thing. Some of the knitting needles in the circular needles have a softer cable, and that's what I prefer to work with. Now I have a smaller pair here where the cable isn't as long. I don't know if you can see that because the cable is more of a clear color, and it's very stiff, unlike this cable, which is real flexible. And when you're working with a cable needle, circular needle where the cable is kind of short, this is probably only about 16 inches, if that. It's not too bad to handle that. But if you're working with one that's more like 24 to 36, sometimes even 40 inches, I don't know if you can see how this gets all bent and crimped, and sometimes that's just a little more difficult to manage. You also have the opportunity to purchase needles that are interchangeable. And by that, I mean a needle like this, where the cable is flexible, which I kind of like. These needles detach. You just kind of push them in and twist them, if I can get it to work. And so you get a kit that gives you a variety of sizes of needles. They're all about the same length, because then you attach your cable, and then you get several different lengths of cable. So the idea is you have whatever size needle you need for any given project. But if you're like me, and you're a crazy person, you've got different projects started, that's not always the case, but they are really handy and very nice to use. One of my favorites is a brand called Addi Turbo, and this is how I like to store my needles. I just wind them and then loop them inside themselves. But the cable is very flexible, and the needles are really nice. And they have a real nice glide to them, and you can get some speed out of these needles. They're very nice. Now the one thing I didn't prepare for the video, which I was going to do and then forgot, are double pointed needles. And that's what these are. They have a point on this end and then also on this end. They again come in a variety of sizes, both in the diameter of the knitting needle and the length of the needle. These I couldn't find all 4 of mine, but these are much longer. I'm not sure. Let me see if I can bring my camera up so you can get the whole. It's not working. Oh well. But these are much longer. These are about 10 to 12 inches. This is solid gold, and the bamboo ones are just a normal size. You'll see when you go to the store. You usually get 5 in a package, and I generally only use, if I'm using double pointed, I generally only use 4 because I like to knit in a triangle. I think a lot of knitters will, and you can look this up on YouTube and see a lot of samples, I'm sure, where you would add your stitches on, and this is how you would knit in the round, and then you would use your 5th needle to knit stitches on and off. I like to knit, however, with them in a triangle shape if I'm going to use them. So I only use the 3 needles, and then the 4th needle I use to stitch put all my stitches, and then, you know, take them off. You can, however, get cable needles that are very small. Like this one is real tiny. But then again, the needle that I have is very small. This is probably only about, well, I don't know, it might be a 7 or a 6. I don't know if you can see the cable there. See that cable? And you would use something like this for doing the collar of a turtleneck, or you could use this for a sleeve, or certainly knitting a hat for an infant. So in some respects you could use this rather than the double pointed needles, but in reality you may have some projects that require a larger needle, and therefore you need to knit in the round as you decrease stitches. Say you're making a cowl neck sweater and you're doing that in the round. Well, that cowl neck, as you come down, you're going to need probably a larger needle. You're not going to need little tiny needles like this. So there's certainly a variety to meet all the needs that you might have going forward as you try to knit in the round. I might use that little pair. Alright, so what I wanted to show you first is what I have prepared ahead of time for you here. And I'm knitting this piece in the round. And as you see the stitch pattern there, it's not much for you to see. But as you knit in the round, it gives you the stocking knit pattern. To acquire this pattern on straight needles, you would knit a row, and then as you come back, purl a row. Then your 3rd row you would knit. As you come back, you would purl, and it would give you this pattern. When you knit in the round, you just continue to knit, and you automatically get that pattern. And so it's very easy to knit in the round. Now, like I said, I already have this one started. I'm just going to show you a few stitches. I just hold them like I would regular knitting needles, and then the cable just kind of hangs below. And to me, they're very comfortable. And you just knit as you normally would. But the caveat is getting the stitches on the needle and joining your work. When I first started to knit with circular needles, the problem that I had was joining the work and not getting a good join. And to be very honest with you, it has only been recently that as I was trying different things, that I stumbled upon something that works for me and causes me to have a neat connection. Well, this is where my marker is, and this is where I started. And you want a really nice, clear, smooth connection, so you really can't tell where it is that you start. So one of the things to be aware of when you start to knit in the round is that you want to make sure, according to your pattern, you have the right needles for the right project. And you want to make sure that you have the right amount of stitches for that needle. Because, like I have here, there's not enough stitches on this set of needles. And so in order for me to begin knitting in the round, I would have to stretch this way too much. And that's really not going to work. Do you see how my stitches are stretched? I can't even get my stitches to the tip of the needle in order to work. And so no matter how I push that, it's really going to be difficult for me to make that work. So you don't want this. You want to avoid this. You want to have enough stitches on the size needles you're using so that you can knit comfortably, as you might have noticed on this purple yarn. See how close my stitches are together and how nicely I can knit, and my stitches are not stretched or pulled. This is what you want. And ultimately, when I first started, the one thing that you need to be careful of when you begin knitting in the round is that you don't twist your stitches. So you add all your stitches on, like I have here in the pink, and then when you get to the place where you're ready to join your work, you want to place your marker. Your instructions will say cast on so many stitches. Say cast on 120 stitches, place marker, and join work. Well, that's when you're just about at this place. You want to make sure that all your stitches are facing in the right direction, and you keep them that way so that you don't twist the yarn on your needles. And that's what I've done here. I've gotten this green yarn to the place where I've gone around once, I placed my marker, I'm coming to the end of my work, I'm going to slip that marker so I know where my start and finish is. And as you can see, I have this string where my work is attached, but that's really not attractive. And if I continue to knit, this will have a big loop at the bottom of my work. And I was finding that I would have to go back and take the tail of my work and try to pull it and knit this together. And I just thought, you know, there should be a better way, and I should be able to knit in the round and have a smooth connection when I join. And so what I began doing initially was I would pull this So initially when I first had that problem and noticed that it was a problem, what I was doing is I was twisting my yarn around and making 2 stitches and trying to get my needle in there to tighten that up. What I've been doing recently, which has worked out well for me, is what I wanted to show you today. And what I do is you want to keep your right hand thread as tight or as taut as you can. And then when you come in to make your first stitch, you're just going to give that stitch a pull. Just knit it like you normally would, and you're going to have this big gap. Then your next stitch, you're going to pull that tight as well. You can see how big that stitch is going to be. But that's going to get better. And then you just continue in that fashion, and at each time that you tug that yarn, it just kind of works its way around and it starts to tighten up. Once I get in about maybe 10 or 15 stitches, I start to ease up on that pulling. I'm hoping I'm in camera here, paying attention to my fingers and not paying attention to where I have the camera. So just keep giving that a little tug. And as we tug that stitch, now of course I picked really big needles here to do this, to show you. And you can't really see any loopiness or big stitches as you work with doing that. The yarn just seems to be able to absorb that. And then as I get further away from that marker, I'm just back to knitting normal. Now I'm going to turn my camera off and I'm going to come around this whole row, and I'm going to come back to you when I get closer to that marker and show you the next row as I'm tightening up these stitches. Okay, so now I'm coming, you see I'm getting close to my marker, just continuing to knit. And just keep scooting your stitches. Now you can see from before, I still have a little bit of a gap here, but it's not as bad as it was. And so again, I'm going to go into this first stitch and I'm going to give it a tug. And I'm going to continue to do that. So as I go into each stitch, I'm just giving it a tug and I'm going to knit it like I normally would. It's just that I'm pulling that yarn. As I continue to tug that, maybe about 10 or 15 stitches, I'll continue to work around the circle. And what I have been finding is that then I have a really neat join, whatever the project is that I'm working on. Generally it's a hat, but it could be an infinity scarf. It's nice to have a nice join when you're making an infinity scarf. And so as I continue to work, that thread might be a little dark for you to be able to see. I've got a nice connection there. So now I'm going to flip back to my pink yarn. Hopefully it'll be a little easier for you to see. I've added on a few more stitches. I like to use the long tail cast on. The only problem with the long tail is that you have to estimate how much yarn you're going to need to put on the amount of stitches that you require. But I really like the edge or the finish that the long tail gives you. And so I'm just going to add on a few more stitches. I've got the corner of my camera right in my line of view here, so it's a little crazy getting all my stitches. Remember not to put your stitches on too tight because you want them to move easily. Even like with knitting on straight needles, you know, any project, you want your stitches to be able to move neatly. And so I'm going to grab myself out a stitch marker or round to mark my round. So I've put on my stitches. This is what I have. I've gone around and I've made sure that all my stitches are facing in the same direction. And I'm going to slip my marker onto the right hand needle. Make sure you take yarn that's connected to the ball, not the yarn that's unconnected. And then you're just going to start knitting like you would with straight needles. You go into that first stitch, I try to keep that as tight as I can, but ultimately when I come back around, I'm probably going to have a little bit of a gap, sometimes even have a large gap. Now I've got these stitches on here a little tighter than probably I should put them on. I do tend to knit tight, so I really have to concentrate and watch myself. I'm just scooting these stitches up, getting closer to my needles so I can knit easily. And then every once in a while I'll just scoot these back down, and you can see that I do have the beginnings of a little bit of a gap right here. See that little gap? Alright, I'm going to turn the camera off again. I'm going to come around this circle, and then I'm going to show you again how to tighten up those stitches. Okay, I'm back, and I'm just about to my marker, and of course my dogs are going to start barking. So I'm just coming to my marker. It's my last stitch. I'm going to slip my marker, and you can see I have again another gap. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep this thread taut, and I'm going to pull and tug on that first stitch. Scoot these up and continue to pull. And as I do that, that's going to tighten that gap where I joined my work together. I think once you get the hang of this, you're really going to like it. Whether you're making a hat, working on a sleeve, an infinity scarf, or if you like to knit sweaters for charity, they can be knit in the round, and then you don't have any seaming or pieces. I'm sure there's a host of other ways you can use the technique of knitting in the round. I almost 100% use circular needles no matter what my project is. I use them as straight needles, and then I use them in the round. It's been a wonderful discovery for me. And so as I continue around the row, I'm going to end up back here where I have my marker, and that will just continue to tighten up. And I'll have a nice joined spot, which other than this thread, you would not be able to tell where my work began and ended. I hope you have found this to be beneficial and helpful. And if you have any questions or would like to leave me a comment, I certainly would love to hear from you. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to check me out, hubpages.com, Time to Be Creative. I also do have an Etsy shop, Time to Be Creative. And I'll talk to you soon. Thanks for watching.